Can you talk more about the undoing of efforts to combat racism? Absolutely. How much time do you have? In 1795, there is a German anthropologist by the name of Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, and he's trying to counter this myth that dark-skinned people are an entirely different species than light-skinned people. So he publishes his findings claiming that there's only one human species, but he divides it into 5 different races, and he believes in his findings that all of humanity originates from the Caucasian race, and that is where we get the origin for Caucasian or whiteness, which would become the basis for scientific racism. Throughout the 1800s, scientific racism becomes the justification and rationalization for slavery as well as colonization. This leads to several stereotypes and myths that are still perpetuated to this day, things such as the white man's burden. The idea being that because the white race is superior, it is their job to elevate the other races and to bring them into civilization, and therefore other races should be more grateful for what the white race does to them as a favor. This is also where we get certain stereotypes like some races being more intelligent than others. But the important thing to understand is that racism is not the core of the issue. Racism is the justification for subjugation. So it justifies and rationalizes cruelty towards other people because it claims that you are superior genetically, therefore you have a right to do so. But it also prevents organization against you because it keeps people fighting against each other. Because the easiest way for you to maintain your current rule is to make sure that anyone who opposes you is too busy fighting each other. So what you'll see, and you'll still see this today, is minorities being pitted against each other through media, through advertising, or simply through propaganda. And that is what racism was doing back then, and that is what racism still does today. The debate around slavery exacerbates into the Civil War, ending in 1865. During that time, General Sherman writes in an official order that formerly enslaved people are to receive land back in a form of reparations. This became known as 40 acres and a mule. However, President Lincoln is shot in April of 1865, and he's replaced by his vice president, the Southern Democrat from Tennessee, Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson doesn't believe in this. He thinks it's unfair. He doesn't think that it's necessary for freed people to receive any type of protection. He thinks that the problem will largely sort itself out, or that the states can handle their own issues. And unfortunately, he's wrong. Johnson becomes president in 1865 at the start of Reconstruction, an absolutely crucial time to fix the problems in the South. You have problems like roving bands of former Confederate soldiers killing people, taking their property, many of whom would join the Ku Klux Klan. You have problems such as black codes, these laws being passed by these governments that essentially restrict freedom and travel for anyone who's black. And unfortunately, Johnson starts vetoing multiple bills that would help fix this. He's very vocally against the 14th Amendment, which allows for equal protection under the law, which would end black codes. And he also vetoes things such as funding the Freedmen's Bureau, which would help curb this violence that's also happening in the South. Things get so bad that Congress starts to overrule Johnson's vetoes, which is very rare in American history. And Johnson doesn't really have any chance at re-election, so he gets replaced by Ulysses S. Grant, who does a better job. He passes things such as the Reconciliation Acts of 1870 to 1871, specifically going after suppression groups like the Ku Klux Klan, eventually causing them to fall apart. And there's other things too, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1875 that was later struck down by the Supreme Court in 1883. Unfortunately, while Grant is making a positive effort, this is not enough, because understand that in the South, voter intimidation is a very real thing. You have certain parishes and counties in the South where there are thousands of Republican voters. However, in elections, none of them are voting because people are being killed or shot at, or you have groups like the Red Shirts or the White League where they will stand outside of polling stations with guns drawn on horseback, making sure that nobody votes Republican. And by 1876, the Electoral College is in dispute. They don't know who to elect, either Samuel Tilden from the Democrats or Rutherford B. Hayes from the Republicans. Eventually, through some deals on the back end, they decide to allow Rutherford B. Hayes to be president in exchange for the federal government withdrawing troops from the South, ending Reconstruction. By the time that this happens, in the 1870s, the South has been reclaimed by Democrats again, conservative Democrats, many of them being Confederate sympathizers. Just so you can understand how effective suppression was, during Reconstruction, about 2,000 black people were elected into local, state, and federal offices. However, by 1880, that number had dwindled down to just a few hundred. In 1901, there were no black members of Congress, and there wouldn't be another black member of Congress until 1929. During this time, many formerly enslaved people became sharecroppers, where you would work for a portion of a crop that you harvested, usually for something as little as 75 cents a day, minus the bills that you incurred. And this was very tough work. It became known as cant to cant, where you would work from when you can't see the sun to when you can't see it again. If you want to learn more about this, you can read about the Missouri Sharecropper Strike of 1939. It's a pretty eye-opening story in the 1930s, mind you, of how bad things were for sharecroppers. Southern states also started resorting to penal labor and convict leasing in order to make money, so they started arresting people for vagrancy and other petty charges, and then imprisoning them and forcing them to work in fields. Like, there were prisons that were built specifically to be a coal mine in the United States so that inmates could work on it. There's also multiple cases where convict leasing was illegal in the United States, yet it was still happening, like in my hometown, for instance. I was also a guest chaplain in 2017 at the Huntsville unit in Texas, and in the state of Texas and Georgia, they don't pay inmates anything for the type of work that they do. And I was told about how inmates would be taken to correctional officers' houses to do work for them on their homes, which, if you ask me, is unethical. There's also Jim Crow laws, which continued until 1965. They started in the 1860s, they were reinforced in 1896, and in general, segregation continued in the South and several parts of the U.S. well into the 1970s. Things got even worse in the 1890s. There was a rise of lynchings, about 100 per year in the 1890s. You had things such as literacy tests and poll taxes, which made it almost impossible for black people to vote in the US, as well as things like white primaries in the South, where only white people could vote in primary elections, something that wouldn't be illegal until 1944. Bear in mind, this is just the 19th century. I could go on about what happened in the 20th century, which has even more information to delve into. Let me know if you'd like to hear it, if you enjoyed watching this so far, and if so, then I'll post a second part to this.